True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
The felony murder rule basically makes it a first-degree felony murder charge if, in the act of committing a felony, let's say you're doing a robbery, in the act of committing a robbery, someone gets killed, maybe not even by your hands, but by someone else's hands, a co-defendant, a co-conspirator's hands. If someone gets killed while you are conducting a felony crime, then you can be convicted of first-degree felony murder.
What is your thought on how fair or not this charge is?
We all should be charged for what we done that day, but nobody committed murder, so why should we be charged with it?
Age should have been a consideration in this one. You know, for the young kids to not even participate in the shooting and get convicted of it, that's the hard part to swallow.
It's just after count, roughly 11 a.m., and the inmates at Wabash Valley are in transit. Blake Layman and Levi Sparks fall in line, some of the youngest inmates at the prison.
I said I've been here for 3 years. Yeah, I've been locked up for 3 years, but it feels like so much longer. I had to mature because this is no place for a kid.
What brought them to Wabash Valley they describe as a bad mistake with a deadly consequence no one expected. On October 3rd, 2012, a group of 5 friends thought no one would be inside this Francis Street home. But when the oldest of the group was shot and killed by the homeowner, and Blake shot in the leg, the rest went down for murder.
When it happened, it was like, what are they talking about?
Blake Layman and Jose Quiros were 16 at the time of their arrest. Levi Sparks was only 17, and Anthony Sharp Jr., 18 years old.
I just put my hands behind my back, and then I had to look behind, and it was like, what am I being arrested for? And then that's when he told me murder, and it was everything just like stopped for a second, like, hold on, what are you talking about?
Their fates became more bleak from there, but after 4 days of testimony, 5 hours of deliberation, all 3 were found guilty of felony murder.
To suggest that the 16-year-old, the 17-year-old was convincing and forcing or making and had a huge impact on the oldest kid there, to do this seems to me ridiculous.
In Indiana, murder occurs when someone kills another human being while committing or attempting to commit a felony. In this case, a burglary.
When they said guilty, I could hear my mom in the audience, and I was like it was the one voice I heard out of over everyone.
The punishment they faced, 45 to 65 years.
When they read it off, I just put my head down and shook my head because it was kind of like I was in another blank space, like when I first got arrested.
And it was an emotional sentencing. Circuit Court Judge Terry Shoemaker handed out a 50-year term for Sparks, 55 years for Layman and Sharp. On September 18th of this year, the answer they'd been waiting for.
Heart dropped. I'm like, oh man, I hope he's right.
The Supreme Court had thrown out their murder convictions.
Yeah, everyone was like, why are you smiling so big as you don't even know?
But will others share a similar path? The Supreme Court didn't throw out its current interpretation of the law, which allows co-defendants to be convicted of murder. Those decisions of who to charge and with what still lie with local prosecutors.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick. Good afternoon.
Today's episode, Guilt by Association, the Felony Murder Rule. Blake Layman made a very bad decision when he was 16, and that decision set off a series of circumstances that would culminate with his arrest and conviction for felony murder. But Blake didn't kill anyone. He broke into a house unarmed. The homeowner, who was armed, shot at him and his friend. His friend was killed. So by Indiana's felony murder rule, Blake is now officially a murderer. The felony murder rule, which comes from all the way back in Old English law, treats people who are guilty of lesser crimes as murderers if they are with murderers when a murder occurs during the commission of a felony. The origins of the felony murder rule lie in a rule of transferred intent, wherein the malicious intent inherent in the commission of any crime, however trivial, was considered to apply to any consequences, whether they're intended or not, from that crime. So this is an example of complete liability, where a person who chooses to commit a crime is absolutely responsible for all consequences of that crime. And this is whether they could predict it or not. Now, almost every state in the United States has a felony murder rule, even though there are some strong legal arguments to be made that it is probably unconstitutional. Critics also believe that the felony murder rule is contrary to the fundamental principle in our legal system that separates the criminals from their culpable mindset. In other words, the rule sets the same amount of blame to someone without the intent to kill as to someone who has a premeditated intent to kill. So today at the quiet end of the bar, we'll be talking about some cases of felony murder, some debatable and some just absolutely absurd. And what is the future of this law? Is there any relief in sight for people like Layman? Of course, we're going to drink some beer too, but first let me thank some 5-star reviewers.
Let's hear it.
Thank you, Runner NYC 1989, Sweater Girl, STJC 83, Breezely, Formidable Me, and Pushing Up Daisies.
Uh-oh. Are they dead?
I hope not. They have to be alive to do a 5-star review. I think it's predicated on that.
I would think. But I like that name.
Yeah, it's good. What have you got for a beer?
I have a beer just because there's different states involved in this discussion. So I just was looking around and I found a beer called Felony IPA.
Sounds perfect.
So I thought it was perfect for our discussion. Felony IPA is brewed by Prism Brewing Company in Lansdale, Pennsylvania. It's an American double IPA, which we've had before. You can look at this as an IPA on steroids.
Oh, so it's super hoppy?
So they tend to be more malty, more robust, more alcoholic, and considerably more hoppy.
And is that why they call it felony, probably? Because it's really severe?
No, actually, they call it felony because it doesn't follow the Reinheitsgebot brewing code of Germany. They add other stuff to it, so it's not a pure beer, and they call it a felony IPA.
Oh, that's clever.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Because most brewers don't follow the Reinheitsgebot laws.
They don't?
No.
Oh.
But anyway.
But in Germany they do?
Yes.
Okay.
But we're in America. So this particular beer, Felony IPA, is a hazy amber color, and it has a moderately sized off-white head. A lot of sweet malt, a lot of floral and citrus hops in the aroma. The taste is very hoppy. Pine hops, grapefruit, some caramel to try to balance it out, but it doesn't. This is a really hoppy, bitter beer. A lot of people like it. A lot of people think it's too bitter.
What do you think?
Wasn't my favorite.
No?
No.
Because of the bitterness? Or?
Yeah, I think my palate's gotten worn out or something. So it was a little over the top for me.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Let's open it up, and then we'll go down to the quiet end.
All right. Are we on?
Yep.
All right. Let's take these bottles down and sit at the quiet end. There's a good crowd there today. Nice sunny day.
That's right. It's a good day to podcast.
Yeah. And there's even people on the deck, which is probably a first for this time of year.
Yeah, right.
So let's have a good time.
Okay, here we go. So one of the most talked about and criticized cases of felony murder is the case of the Elkhart Four. In October of 2012, there were 4 teens and 1 young adult from Elkhart County, Indiana, and they decided to break into a house to steal some cash. They knocked on the doors and no one answered. Jose Quiros, 16, Blake Layman, 16, Anthony Sharp, 18, and Danzel Johnson, 21, broke into the house while Levi Sparks, 17, waited on the porch of the house as kind of a lookout across the street. But the homeowner was in the house asleep, and when he woke up to the noise of intruders in his house, he grabbed his gun, he shot several times, and killed Danzel Johnson and wounded Blake Layman. Now, by Indiana's felony murder rule, if someone dies during the commission of a felony, everyone involved in the felony can be charged with first-degree murder. So 16-year-old Jose Quiros accepted a plea deal, and at sentencing, Jose said he wanted to withdraw the deal. But Judge Terry Shoemaker denied this request and sentenced this 16-year-old boy to 45 years in prison for a murder that he didn't do. Blake Layman, Levi Sparks, and Anthony Sharp went to trial in August of 2013. The trial lasted 4 days, and it was rushed. On the final day of the trial, the judge refused to let the jury leave until they'd reached a verdict. At 11 p.m., the jury returned with a guilty verdict. On September 12, 2013, Judge Shoemaker sentenced Blake Layman and Anthony Sparks to 55 years in prison each, and Levi Sparks to 50 years in prison.
So wait a minute. What do you mean he rushed the trial? They're trying to get through it quickly?
Sounds like it, yeah.
And he instructed the jurors?
That they couldn't leave until they came up with a verdict, which doesn't seem legal.
No, it seems like we could have a mistrial or a retrial.
Based on that alone, yeah.
Just by that.
Right.
And the other question I have is, what about the guy who actually did the shooting, the homeowner? He was not ever charged with anything?
No, he was protecting his home.
So they have a stand your ground rule or homeowner protection rule or something like that in Indiana?
Absolutely. So I don't know why you would get up and just start shooting. I would think even if you have a gun, why wouldn't you say, I have a gun, get out of the house? And I bet they would have left.
They would have.
I mean, what I heard a radio interview with the homeowner where he actually said he decided to trap them in the house and get the police over there. So he was trying to stop them by shooting them rather than getting the police in there.
And by Indiana law, he has every right to do that.
I guess so. He was not charged with anything.
That's fucked up, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah. Now, the state Supreme Court ordered their cases to go back to trial for all three to be found guilty of the lesser felony charge of burglary and to be resentenced on a burglary conviction. Jose was not mentioned in the appeal because he had accepted that plea deal, which he was kind of forced into, it seems like.
Yeah. And he tried to get out of it, but they wouldn't allow it.
Yeah. Now, on January 7th, Sparks, Sharp, and Layman were resentenced in trial court on the lesser charge of burglary. That's just this year, in January. So Sparks was given 9 years, and Sharp and Layman were given 10 years. So Layman is expected to be released sometime this year, and Sharp is scheduled for release in May 2018.
Well, that's better than 40 to 50 years.
Sure, but they didn't change the law. That's the problem.
And it still seems kind of a harsh penalty for robbery, first time.
Well, it's not even robbery. Robbery would be where you confront someone.
Or in...
burglary.
Okay.
Yeah.
But those are pretty stiff sentences, it seems to me.
Well, and don't even get me started that they're under 18. I mean, why are they being charged as adults anyway?
Right.
I don't understand that either. But this is about felony murder, so we'll stick with that topic.
We will.
In February, Jose's sentence was also modified to burglary, and he was resentenced to 10 years, so he should be out this fall. But still, they're in prison a long time, and being that young and going to prison, I think that can really have an effect and change a person.
Well, can it?
Of course.
I mean, I suppose it depends what prison you're in and who you're exposed to, but still, any prison would change your viewpoint on life.
Well, when they turn 18, they're transferred over to the adult area.
Great.
Yeah. I know. It's disturbing.
So this seems like an extreme case where the felony murder rule was misused. This is in part because the Indiana felony murder rule doesn't specify that the murder victim has to be innocent and not one of the perpetrators.
Right.
So there's something right there.
Yeah, so it was one of the perpetrators who got killed.
Right. So we investigated the rule by reading a recent book on felony murder.
Mm-hmm.
And here's some examples of the law in action. And people are going to be amazed by these examples.
I know. I was.
John Earl Hickman was with a friend when the friend overdosed on cocaine. He was convicted of felony murder because of drug possession.
So the felony is that he's possessing drugs. His friend dies.
And his friend died while he took the drugs.
But it's not a murder at all.
Well,
it's an overdose, so that's...
Virginia says it is.
Okay.
Another example, North Carolina college student Janet Dennehy set fire to a bag of party decorations as a prank in front of an exterior door of her boyfriend's apartment. The apartment building caught fire and 4 people were killed. Janet pled guilty to 4 counts of felony murder.
Yes, and she's still in prison. That's one we'll touch on again in this conversation.
Okay, because I'm thinking that's not too off point.
What do you mean? You think that's okay?
Yeah.
But that's an accident. That's not a murder.
Well, you had to have known that if you're setting fire to something outside of a building, maybe bad things can happen.
Well, I suppose. I think it's more of a manslaughter or negligent homicide.
Well, okay.
I'm not a lawyer, but that seems extreme to me.
That's splitting hairs, I think. But anyway, we'll talk about that some more.
Okay.
Here's another one that will boggle your mind. 7 months after stealing a car, James Kohlenberg of Missouri was driving the stolen car down a residential street when a 2-year-old suddenly darted out in front of the car. The toddler was hit and killed. James was convicted of felony murder based on the car theft.
Exactly.
So he wasn't speeding or breaking any laws while he was driving the car down the street.
Yeah, that's tricky for me. I mean, he did steal the car, and I would think if he stole the car and he was in a race with police or something, in a chase, that would be different.
Sure, but he wasn't.
This was months later? He was still driving the car?
7 months.
Yeah.
So the police might not be very good in that place in Missouri to not track down the stolen car.
Right.
He's probably driving it around in plain sight of people.
Sounds like it. Although maybe he'd left the state and he was far away. I don't know, but that seems extreme to me too.
It does. Another one, Ryan Holley, a young man in Florida, often loaned his car to his roommate. At the end of a party, the roommate talked with guests about stealing a safe from a drug dealer's house. The housemate asked Ryan for his car keys. Tired and drunk, Ryan handed over his keys and went to bed. The roommate and another friend stole the safe and clubbed someone in the house to death.
Yeah, the daughter of the drug dealer.
Ryan was convicted of felony murder and sentenced to life without parole for assisting with the felony by providing the getaway vehicle.
Wow. What do you think of that one? I mean, some things that I've read on that said that he acknowledged that they were planning to go and do a theft. But then I read other things where he thought they were just joking about it. But still, I just don't see how he could be held accountable.
No. I mean, whether he knew that they were going to commit a crime or not.
Yeah.
I don't think he could be held responsible.
You don't think he should be?
No.
Yeah, well, it makes you think about who you loan your car out to. That's for sure.
That's right.
Right. That's pretty crazy.
One more. A New York burglar, Bill Ingram, broke into a house only to be confronted by the homeowner. The homeowner forced him at gunpoint to lie down and bound him until the police arrived. After Ingram was taken away by police, the homeowner suffered a fatal heart attack, and Ingram was convicted of felony murder.
I don't agree with that
either.
So
that sounds a little harsh.
Yeah. Well, in these cases, it kind of seems that felony murder rule, maybe we should abolish it or at least change it. I mean, in England, they abolished it in the 1950s. But most felony murder convictions are intentional shootings related to armed robberies. These are not the usual case.
No, these are extreme examples, and I'm sure they were picked to focus on the author's point of view.
But it's a risk that this could happen to people because the law can be used that way. I mean,
certainly.
Like the intro said, it's up to the prosecutor, the local prosecutor, what they want to do.
That's right.
So what if a rapist holds his hand over a child's face and unintentionally kills that child? Isn't that accidental? Or no, it's not accidental. I mean, most people would agree that the rapist should be convicted of felony murder in that case.
Yes.
And that's the kind of case that the rule was made for.
Okay.
But how do you make the law so that that doesn't get applied to these other types of cases? I mean, if you have abduction and, a murder where he doesn't really plan to murder, or if you have burglary where they don't really plan to hurt anybody, would it be different if the kids that were burglarizing the house were armed? Would that make a big difference to you?
It would.
Okay. I thought so, yeah. What about if a robber holds a gun to a clerk's head and his finger slips and he shoots the clerk. Now, should that robber be convicted of felony murder?
Yes.
Yeah? Why?
Because he pointed the gun at the guy.
And when you point a gun at someone, that's the risk you're taking.
That's correct. Whether your finger slips or not.
Right. Well, what if someone sets fire to collect on insurance and a family is burned alive unintentionally?
Yes to that, too.
Okay.
I mean, unless you know for sure that there's nobody in the house, you're setting a fire. By doing that, you have acknowledged that there could be harm coming from setting that fire.
Yeah, and how can you absolutely know that no one's in the house?
Right.
And fire, it gets out of control. You could kill someone next door.
Sure.
All right. Well, the New York Times featured the Ryan Hawley case in a critical portrayal of the felony murder rule. And also the Elkhart 4 received a lot of publicity. So has the case of Justin Doyle. He was 15 when he was charged with felony murder. Justin and two friends knew the owner of a home where they planned to perform a burglary in 2008. The owner was in the hospital that night, so they thought it was safe to go in and do it. But they didn't know that he had a friend staying in the house, and the friend was asleep inside the house. So the friend woke up to the sound of breaking glass, grabbed a gun from the dresser drawer, and when one of the teens opened the bedroom door, the man fired the gun. And Travis Castle, a 14-year-old boy, was killed. Justin Doyle was charged with Travis's murder. And the third boy, Nathan Whitmire, was charged with residential burglary, and he got a lighter sentence and was released in 2013. But after serving 9 years of his 30-year sentence, Justin has been released, and his sentence was reduced.
Okay.
What do you think about that one?
I mean, that's basically the same thing as the Elkhart case.
It's similar, yeah.
Similar. I mean, basically the same. The homeowner or the person residing in the home.
I kind of feel like this person in the home, it was more reasonable. You know, if you're in your bedroom and someone comes in the bedroom, that would be really frightening, and you might shoot the gun.
Well, that's true.
That's a little different than going out in the house and trying to trap the kids.
Well.
And shooting two of them.
We don't know that for sure, although he suggested that he was trying to do that.
Right.
But still, it's the same thing, that the person in the home shot intruders.
Okay, so what do you think about this?
Well, it's the same thing. I don't see how you charge the other people breaking in with felony murder.
Would you charge the friend that was staying in the home for shooting the kid when he opens the bedroom door?
That's a tougher question to answer.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I would. I mean, maybe the Elkhart case, I would charge the homeowner with that, specifically after he said that he was trying to trap them.
Right.
But like you said, this guy's, it's not his home. He's just staying in the home to kind of guard it or something.
I don't know.
And he's asleep in a room and somebody breaks into the room. He doesn't know what's going on.
No, that's true. But do you really need to shoot instantly? Wouldn't it be better to say, I've got a gun, leave, and then if they still keep coming, I could see?
It sounds nice to say that if it's not happening to you in the moment.
I still don't think I'd shoot him.
Well,
but
it might be too late. I mean, if you say, suppose somebody's breaking into your room and they have a gun and you say, stop or I'll shoot, and they shoot you first.
But wouldn't it be just as easy to grab your cell phone and call 911 as it is to grab a gun?
I don't know how much time you had.
Yeah. Okay. Well, another case that I found really concerning was the case of Cedric Chapman. So this was a 17-year-old who was shot and killed by a Chicago police officer after he jumped out of a car that had been stolen earlier and had been used in a robbery and a beating. Chapman's two friends were charged with felony murder in Chapman's death, even though they were blocks away when he was shot and killed, because they'd stolen the car with him, and then the policeman shot and killed one of the kids.
Uh-huh.
You follow that?
I got it.
What do you think of that?
Well, I wouldn't charge them with felony murder.
Well,
'cause
they got their friend killed by stealing a car.
Yes, they did. But the intent on stealing the car wasn't that they were going to do harm to anybody. They were just going to boost a car.
And another question there is, why did the policeman shoot the kid who's jumping out of the car? It's a whole other topic.
Whole other topic.
Yeah. Okay. Well, another case was on May 22nd, 1995, and this is a highly publicized case. 5 teens ranging in age from 15 to 18 were drinking alcohol and cruising in a pickup truck around Agora Hills, a suburban town in Los Angeles County, California. Less than an hour before a fatal stabbing occurred, one of the five, Jason Holland, who was 18, grabbed a wallet from an unlocked vehicle in the parking lot of a public park, an act that was witnessed by the wallet's owner, and that's a mother who was playing in the park with her children. She recognized the truck and she confronted the five, demanding and receiving her wallet back. Now, according to this mother, the theft involved intimidation from the boys, or young men. So this theft, with intimidation, would be used to support the prosecution's contention that the five were still acting together at the time of the murder. So that's kind of important as to what happens later.
Oh, okay, because you lost me there for a minute. I wasn't aware there was a murder.
This was before the murder.
So before
about an hour before the murder.
Before the murder, they stole a wallet, got confronted by the owner of the wallet.
And they were intimidating.
And they were intimidating to her.
Right.
And she recognized the pickup truck they were driving.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So they were looking for marijuana, so they drove to the home of Michael McLaurin, who was known around town to sell marijuana from a desk drawer in this fort-like ramshackle building in his backyard. So a key factor in the murder trial would be whether the five intended to buy the marijuana or steal it. Now McLaurin was 17, and his friend Jimmy Ferris was 16, and they were in the yard outside the fort when four of the five boys hopped the fence, and that was with Micah Holland, 15, leading the way. Now Micah entered the fort, and Anthony Malati, 17, he was physically the largest of the group, stood in the doorway of the fort. So their entry to the property would draw an additional charge of burglary. Now Jason Holland testified he was drunk and lagging behind the others, and he didn't see how the argument began between Micah and Mike McLaurin. Now as he entered, they started fighting, and Brandon Hine, 18, jumped into the fight, as did Jason, who says he was trying to get Mike off his brother Micah. So Jason opened a folding pocket knife, and he pricked McLaurin twice in the back to get him off his brother.
What do you mean pricked? I mean, say stabbed.
Okay, well, they weren't deep stabs. Slashed.
How do you know that?
Well, I know it from reading the transcripts from the trial.
Okay.
They were like slashes.
But he drew a knife.
He did.
And attacked the guy.
Yeah, I'm not trying to minimize that.
Okay. Well, you were, sort of. You said he pricked the kid with the knife.
Okay.
And I wouldn't use that verb.
Okay. But you're okay with slashed?
Slashed would be okay.
Okay.
I don't see how you prick someone with a knife.
Prick sounds like a toothpick or something.
Yes.
Okay. I see. I won't say that then. So then he stabbed him in the chest. So now I'm saying stabbed.
Okay. You got a good verb there.
And then Jimmy Ferris entered the fort to help Mike McLaurin. These were the two guys that were there already.
Mm-hmm.
And Jason stabbed him twice. And Brandon Hyde punched him in the head and face. Now Mike McLaurin survived his wounds, but Ferris died in the emergency room. So when Jason Holland learned from his mother that he was wanted for murder, he went into hiding, but then several weeks later he voluntarily surrendered. So he was the one that did the actual stabbing, Jason Holland. So we're not even going to talk. He should be in prison. He stabbed them, so that's not even
He committed the crime and confessed to committing the crime.
Right, so that's not even the topic of our discussion.
Okay.
But the following is a description of the fight and stabbing from the 2001 California Court of Appeal findings. So the term appellants, that includes Christopher Veraldo, who was 17 and owned the pickup truck. And he remained in the truck through the whole fight and incident, and he was tried separately. So, according to the transcripts, it was about 7 p.m. Mike McLaurin and Jimmy Ferris were in the McLaurin backyard in the immediate vicinity of the fort. Without permission or invitation, all appellants, that's the group of boys, entered the backyard by hopping over a fence. Now Micah Holland and Malati entered first, and Jason and Brandon Hine followed about 10 or 15 feet behind. Micah immediately entered the fort, and Anthony Malati stood in the doorway. Appellants did not have permission or invitation to enter the fort, and there had not been any prior arrangement for the sale of marijuana between Mike McLaurin and the guys. So Jason was carrying a folding pocket knife. There's no evidence that Micah, Brandon Hine, or Anthony Malati carried any weapons or that any of them knew that Jason had a pocket knife. So Micah unsuccessfully attempted to pull open the desk drawer. Next, Micah and Brandon Hine, in a threatening manner, shouted words demanding that Mike McLaurin turn over the key to the locked desk drawer. So that kind of sounds like they're trying to steal from them, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
So Micah, when threatening Mike McLaurin and demanding the key, shouted, "Give me the key, fool, give me the key." So then they mentioned some things about a gang. The Gumbies was mentioned. But there's no proof they belonged to a gang, and that they might have just been using the gang's name to sound threatening and to scare them. So Micah, Jason, and Brandon then verbally and physically assaulted Mike McLaurin, and the violence escalated. Mike McLaurin held Micah face down on a bed and elbowed him in the back and neck. Jason attempted to pull Mike McLaurin off of Micah, and McLaurin kicked Jason in the face. McLaurin then heard Jason say, "Let's get this fucker." So while being held in a headlock, Mike McLaurin twice felt sharp, debilitating, pulsing sensations, which later proved to be multiple stab wounds. And like we said, Jason Holland admitted that he stabbed him. But after McLaurin was stabbed, Jimmy Ferris entered the fort and he became involved in the fight. So Jimmy Ferris confronted Jason, who without hesitation stabbed Ferris twice in the torso. And then Mike McLaurin observed Brandon Hine beating Ferris in the head and face with his fists. So Ferris did not resist or defend himself from the blows administered by Brandon Hine. So both Mike McLaurin and Jimmy Ferris broke away from the fight and ran to the house. And when they got into the house, they told Mike's mother that the boys had come to steal their stuff and had stabbed them. And that's when she saw that there was a stab wound right in the center of Jimmy Ferris's chest, so that would be the fatal stab wound.
Yeah, must have gotten his heart or some artery or something.
Yeah. So witnesses observed the boys then leaving the yard and being met by the pickup truck and driving away. A witness testified that he saw the four boys on the street and that they left the backyard talking among themselves and smiling. So at trial, Jason Holland admitted that he stabbed both the other guys. But the jury found all four guilty of burglary, attempted robbery, and the murder. So that's felony murder. So Jason Holland, Brandon Hine, and Anthony Malati were sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Micah Holland received 29 years to life. Christopher Villardo pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter and conspiracy to commit burglary, and he was sentenced to 11 years. Now, he was in the truck.
He didn't go in.
No.
He was in the truck waiting.
Yeah, but he did go pick them up.
Well, yeah, so I would find him culpable for that.
Yeah.
But he got a far reduced sentence compared to the others.
So he was released in 2000. So there was a lot of controversy, though, because it's questionable if they did plan a robbery. Jimmy Ferris's parents believe that the convictions are just for the murder of their son, but according to many critics, the prosecutor's office was urged by the victim's father to get the heaviest possible charge, because Jim Ferris is an LAPD police officer. So some people say that if the victim had not been a police officer's son, the felony murder rule would never have been applied.
Boy, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
You think they did that because the guy's a cop?
Well, that's what the families of the guys in prison think.
The way you're relating this to me sounds like they were there with the intention of robbing and not purchasing.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so they knew or might have had or should have had an idea that this wouldn't go over well with the people that had the drugs.
True.
And that violence could ensue.
Now, what about the guys selling the drugs, though? Weren't they committing a felony by having possession of a pound of marijuana?
Well, certainly.
But they weren't charged with felony murder.
Well, one of them's dead.
True. Okay, good point. Good point.
And the other one...
But the other one wasn't charged.
Yeah, I guess if you're going to use the felony murder rule, he should have been charged.
That's what I'm thinking. Now, in a 60 Minutes segment, a spokesman for the defendants' families charged that the boys were punished not for what they did, but for who was killed. The family spokesman said it's about a police officer's son who died, and the only way they could convict all these guys was to use the felony murder rule. So James Ferris Sr., the victim's father, says, "The fact that I'm a policeman has nothing to do with it. I just happen to be a policeman whose son was murdered."
Yeah, I would go along with that.
Yeah, so you think that was okay?
I do.
Wow.
I mean, I'm not sure why, if we're going to invoke felony murder, why the surviving guy wasn't also charged in that to some extent.
But don't you think the kid that actually did the stabbing should have been punished more than the other kids? Because don't young kids get into fights sometimes, teenagers?
Well, they do.
And they could get felony murder because another teenager kills another teenager?
Well, and in this case, though, it could have been another one. I mean, the fact that the guy who did the actual stabbing was charged with it. I mean, what if the other kids had a knife?
Well, that'd be a whole different story, though. He's the only one that had a knife, as far as we know.
Yeah, but still.
I mean, it's kind of like what you said about the the burglaries. If those kids had gone into the houses with a weapon, that would be different.
Well, the intent's different.
Right.
Right.
But that's the thing with the felony murder rule. It doesn't consider intent.
No, it doesn't.
No.
But these kids, I mean, we're going in, and I would believe that they intended to rob the place because they had already robbed some lady's wallet.
True.
An hour or so before.
Well, that's why that was used as well.
So there's some intent there.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay. Fair enough.
So just a quickie follow-up on that. In March 2009, Brandon's sentence was commuted from life to 29 years to life. Oh. So he's eligible for parole in 3 more years, as well as Micah Holland.
I still think it's pretty severe.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really have too much disagreement with them.
Yeah.
For that.
Okay. So that's kind of like being guilty by association, really. They weren't part of it.
They were part of it, except for the kid driving the car.
Okay.
The pickup.
Yeah, but they weren't part of the knife.
No, but they were part of the fight. Yes. And they were part of the plan to rob the place.
Well, there's no proof that they were planning that, although I see what you're saying, where that could be, that's possible.
I would construe it as planning to rob the place.
I would wonder if they had money with them to buy it.
Yeah.
If they had the money, that they could have bought the marijuana. But then the part about trying to open the drawer themselves.
But if they had the money, they go in and say, we want to buy some, and the transaction's completed, and they leave.
Yeah. Good point. I hadn't really considered it that way. You're kind of changing my mind about that one a little bit.
Well, sometimes I can do that.
You can. You're convincing.
Okay, let's go back to the case of Janet Danahy. So this is the one who set the fire in front of her ex's door.
Yeah, it was an exterior door. It wasn't inside the building.
Right.
Okay.
So it's Valentine's Day 2002. Janet and her boyfriend, Thad, they had recently, and by all reports amicably, broken up. The then 23-year-old woman got together with 2 girlfriends that night to play cards and drink some wine. Their circle of friends was always playing pranks on each other, and this night the 3 girls, Janet, Nicole, and Adrienne, schemed about what kind of trick they could pull on Thad. So they decided to sabotage his car. They visited a grocery store looking for fish oil or something smelly to pour into the young man's fresh air vent. They brought a bottle of clam juice and headed to Thad's apartment building.
Ew.
Yeah, that would stink things up,
That would be
wouldn't it?
Yucky, yeah.
When they discovered his car wasn't there, Janet grabbed charcoal lighter and set a small fire atop an old futon outside Thad's door.
Okay, now that's really stupid.
Really stupid.
Yes.
Isn't it?
It is. I don't know if it's criminal, but it's really stupid.
Well, I think it borders on criminal. Because, yes, it's exterior.
Yes.
It's on the porch or something.
Right.
But it wasn't that they set a bag of something on fire. They set a couch on fire.
Yeah, the fact that it was on a futon, yeah, that's really dumb.
So they could hear people inside the apartment, and the idea was to knock and run, leaving Thad's roommates to stamp out the flames. Now, the night was windy, and the fire got out of control, and it soon engulfed the apartment building. 4 people were killed. Sisters Rachel and Donna Llewellyn, ages 21 and 24, Ryan Beck, age 25, and Elizabeth Harris, age 20. Janet never stopped to think what heartache could result from that childish and senseless act.
True.
Janet admitted to police and to the father of Elizabeth Harris that she had set the fire and begged for forgiveness, But she was soon faced with the cold reality of North Carolina's felony murder statute, which dozens of other states also have on their books. Under the felony murder rule, and we've gone over this again and again,
Yeah.
if anyone is killed during the commission of a felony, in this case arson being the felony, the perpetrator of the felony can be charged with murder and sentenced to death. It holds even if the victim's death was an accident, which this most certainly was.
Sure.
Janet had to choose between pleading guilty and receiving life in prison with no chance of parole, or going to trial where, if found guilty, she would automatically get the death penalty.
Wow.
So she pled guilty.
Wow.
Wouldn't you?
Yeah, I don't see how you could find that as a death penalty case, though.
Well, the way the courts were looking at it was if she were found guilty. So I guess you could roll the dice and hope that you're not found guilty.
Yeah.
But if you are, you have an automatic death penalty.
Well, I'm just thinking there should be something lower to call it besides murder. Negligent homicide is one of my favorites to say, even though I'm not a lawyer, I don't know exactly what the criteria for that is.
But they applied the felony murder law.
They did.
To this.
But I don't know if that's really productive for society. I mean, she's not a hazard to society.
Well, that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, she's just stupid, and hopefully she learned her lesson.
Yeah, but she killed 4 people.
Yes.
Okay.
So do you think it's more the attitude that someone has to pay? I mean, it's really...
that's a good point.
But it's an accident. I mean, it's clearly an accident. We know that.
Well, yes, it's an accident, but I think by setting that fire, you had to have realized that maybe something bad could happen from it.
Maybe. I mean, she's drinking wine. She's with her friends.
Yeah, I think the alcohol probably impaired her thought process a little bit.
Right, right.
And it probably sounded like a good idea at the time. We'll set this fire, knock on the door, run away. They'll come out and get the fire out.
Sure. And I'm sure people have done similar things hundreds of times.
Right.
And no one's been hurt.
But this got out of hand.
Right.
So the fire spread quickly and ended up killing people.
And what about the friends that were with her? Why aren't they
that's
in
a good
prison
point.
for felony murder? I mean, that's something.
If we apply the law that way, they should be also.
Yes, I agree.
They were never charged?
No, just her.
Huh.
Which is different from these other cases.
It is different from the other cases because the way we've looked at those cases, the whole group, it's a group activity. We're all charged.
Yeah, and I can almost see it with this case because they're going to do it together. They're all consenting they're going to start a fire.
Right.
And I can almost see that the other ones should be if she is.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Well, as we said, it's applied differently depending on the jurisdiction, but generally speaking, the underlying felony must present a foreseeable danger to life. So in some cases, accomplices can also face the ultimate penalty if they exhibited extreme indifference to human life. So in Janet's case, her 2 girlfriends never spoke to her again, and they weren't charged. So Janet apologized and assumed full responsibility. Before this happened, Janet had been a good person. As a high school student, she was described as sweet, responsible, and respectful. She'd won the Girl Scouts top award, was active in several clubs, including the Young Christian Society. She played the viola. She carried the Olympic torch during part of the run to Atlanta's 1996 Summer Olympic Games, and she made the dean's list in college. But none of this absolves her of the blame.
No, I would say the same thing. That doesn't matter.
Well,
how good a citizen she is.
Right, but the record shows that she just made this stupid decision one night that ruined her life.
It sure did.
Which I guess happens.
Yes.
Plenty of people make a stupid decision that takes their own life.
Mm-hmm.
Car accidents, drug overdoses, the perils of youth. On the other hand, prosecutors rightfully pointed out in court that Janet was an intelligent college graduate, so she should have known that using an accelerant and setting a fire on a windy night could result in a catastrophic fire and damage and could hurt somebody.
I agree.
So the state maintained that Janet and her friends exhibited complete indifference by leaving the scene without making sure the fire was actually put out. I agree with that. They should have stayed there and made sure.
Yes.
So.
But then again, I mean, she has her 2 girlfriends with her.
Right, and they left.
And they left too.
I don't understand why they weren't charged.
Yeah, I mean, different state from the other ones we've discussed, but still, it seems like if we're going to apply this law fairly, they all should have been charged.
Well, it seems like it isn't applied fairly because in all these different cases, it's used differently. It's very flexible. It depends on the prosecutor.
It does, yeah.
Well, in 2012, Janet's lawyers noted that she's been a model prisoner, and they filed a petition for clemency with the outgoing governor to have her sentence reduced to time served. And the attorneys call what happened on that February night a joke, a foolish prank, a thoughtless act, but with no malicious intent, which I would agree. And they've asked for an adjustment to a sentence that is not out of proportion to the conduct involved. One of Janet's most visible supporters is Elizabeth Harris's father, Robert, who said that he forgave Janet years ago. And his words were part of her clemency petition. I still picture Janet with outreached hands, handcuffed, trembling, shaking almost violently, crying intensely, speaking almost incoherently. These are the hands that are responsible for Beth's death, and my reactions were instinctive. I went over to her, I held her tightly, and I whispered, "I forgive you, Janet," several times. So that's one of the victim's father.
Mm-hmm.
So he forgave her.
Yeah. So what happened at the clemency hearing?
Well, there were some family members of the victims that were really opposed to her getting clemency, though, and they spoke as well. So Governor Perdue left office without acting on it, leaving the request in a state of suspension for the next governor, who was McCrory. And in December 2016, Janet heard from the clemency office that her request was reopened. So her life sentence in prison was commuted by the outgoing governor, Pat McCrory, making her eligible for parole in 2029. That's still a long fucking time.
Wow, that doesn't sound like much was accomplished there.
I mean, I guess it's better than life, but it's still spending most of her life in prison.
I mean, she's still got another dozen years.
Yeah, another 12, 13 years.
Yep.
So, I don't know. I mean, I see how stupid it is, but tell us about the book you read about changing the law. What did you find out about that?
Well, I like this book. I read this book by a professor of law at the State University of New York, Buffalo Law School.
Okay.
His name is Gayora Binder, and his recommendation for changing the law sounds very simple to me and easily understood.
Oh, good.
So he's looking at it as the principle of dual culpability, and he required two things to be present to make a charge of felony murder. One is that violence or apparent danger to life can occur. Okay?
That's kind of vague, though.
I don't think so.
No?
So you're going in to rob a bank or to steal stuff.
Yeah.
No, not steal stuff. Although it could. But anyway, you're going in to rob a bank.
Okay. So you have a gun.
You have a gun.
Okay. What if you have a fake gun?
Doesn't matter.
Why?
Because you have a gun that people who you're robbing would think is a real gun.
Yeah.
So
But you can't shoot anyone with it.
No. But the way the victims would look at it is that's a real gun.
Yeah. But they're not going to get shot, so there's no risk of them getting hurt.
But they don't know that.
Right.
So
there doesn't have to be an actual risk. There just can be a perception of a risk.
Violent or apparent danger to life.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
And that the second part is that there's a sufficiently malign purpose, which is independent of injury to the victim.
Explain that.
So that means that you recognize that violence could occur.
Okay. Even if nobody's got a weapon.
Right.
Huh.
So those two things. So in looking at that example, like with the kids that were burglarizing the house and the homeowner shot one of them, that shouldn't be felony murder.
Right. Because one of them didn't do it?
One of them didn't do it.
Yeah. And
that there was no purpose or intent of possible injury on the part of the kids.
Okay.
So I like it. To me, it's a very simple, elegant definition, and I think it would stand up pretty nicely.
So that wouldn't help the kids in the Jimmy Ferris case?
No, it wouldn't.
Where the one of them stabbed him?
No.
So they'd still be in prison?
They would be.
And what about Janet? That's she's on the fence there.
She's on the fence. I'd still think she should have recognized that there was a possibility that things could get out of hand.
Yes.
And that could cause injury.
Right.
So I'm not too upset with that verdict.
No. Well, I think it's very extreme.
Well, Yeah.
And if we start punishing everyone who does something stupid, we just have more and more people in prison. I mean, why not make her do community service or make it up in some way? Why waste her whole life in prison when she's not a threat to anyone?
Well, again, I think that's another discussion.
Okay.
I mean, if I'm looking at the felony murder rule, whether
Yes.
the old definition or the new proposed definition, she's guilty.
Yeah, but what about her accomplices? Why aren't they guilty?
Well, I don't know why.
Yeah.
I would,
We'd have to find more information on how that happened.
yes. But
Because-
I'd go after them too.
Well, the man who killed Jimmy Ferris, he's taken full responsibility that he's the one that killed him. But that doesn't stop them from putting the rest of them in prison. So why in Janet's case, her taking responsibility would absolve her friends, I have no idea.
I don't either.
Yeah.
Like you said, though, maybe Virginia looks at it differently than the state. That was Los Angeles, California.
Yeah.
So maybe Virginia looks at it differently,
Yeah, I guess so.
but I don't know why.
Yeah. So you like the idea of changing the law,
Well,
modifying it.
I think it should be modified.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's a crappy law the way it's observed, and it doesn't even look like it's observed consistently.
No, that's the thing about it. It just depends how badly they want to get you, it seems like.
Yeah.
Which is not good.
So I think that it could be spruced up a bit.
Yeah. Well, that's how it's leaning. I mean, this book by a law professor, many in the legal community are leaning that way, so we'll see what happens
Yeah.
with that.
Well, I mean, some want to abolish it. Some want to abolish it altogether, like Great Britain has done.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that that's the solution.
I don't think I have a problem with that.
But I think it could be tweaked a bit to make it more reasonable.
Oh, absolutely. I think so, too.
Okay.
Okay, anything else to say on the felony murder rule?
No.
No. Okay. All right. Thanks for doing all that research. I know it took a lot of time.
Well, you put the time in. I just floated along.
Oh, you did not. You read it. Well, before we get to our feedback section, I just want to talk a little bit about what's going on with our Team Tie Grabber, our Tie Grabbers. We have 4 new full-length episodes on our premium feed for members only, and we have a lot more to come. We recently released an episode on Diane Downs, who was accused of shooting her 3 children because she was in love with the guy who didn't want any kids, so she thought, well, this'll fix it. It's a really fascinating story, a truly deranged woman. Kind of reminded me a lot of Susan Smith, who rolled her car into the water with her kids.
Yeah, I mean the same thing. She was with a guy who didn't want kids.
Yeah.
And he had broken up with her.
Yeah, she wasn't even, well, neither one of them were really with the guy.
No, that's true.
They had this weird perception.
Right, but the perception was that if I didn't have kids, I could be with this guy.
Right. And I really liked your talk in that episode on histrionic personality disorder. That was really informative. I enjoyed that. Now, before that, we covered the Bart Whitaker case, and that's about a college student, or he said he was a college student, but he was kind of faking his way and taking money from his parents. And he plotted the murders of his entire family, his mom, his dad, and his little brother, just for the money, basically, and to hide what a dick he was.
That's right.
So, we also released that episode a little while back about Sylvia Likens. And this was a case back in the 1960s of a young girl whose parents were poor and they kind of farmed her out with a neighborhood lady. And the neighbor lady and her kids, and even kids in the neighborhood, really kind of kept her in the basement and tortured her. That was a really scary case, and this was back in the 60s, when you think that there wasn't a lot of crime, but this was horrible.
Yeah, it was a hard case to do.
It was. We also have one out on the milkshake murder of Robert Kissel. He was a successful businessman who was poisoned by his wife, and then not much time went by before his brother was killed in a violent murder.
Mm-hmm.
And coming up, we have a multiple episode project on the murders of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman and the O.J. Simpson trial. We also have a members-only podcast we're working on baby Bella Bond, who was a little girl whose body was found on a Massachusetts beach in 2015. And this is a case that's currently still open, but her mother and her mother's boyfriend are charged for this.
Right, the boyfriend's trial is just beginning.
Yeah. Now, the state investigations into her parents are really shocking, and we're going to discuss that. Plus a little bit about the Department of Health and Human Services, because there were actually open cases about Bella being neglected that were closed. Bella's mom had other children taken away for neglect, So we have to wonder there, did we really drop the ball? Did she fall through the cracks? And all of these full-length, full-quality episodes are yours to enjoy by joining Team TieGrabber. So just head on over to tiegrabber.com, sign up. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month, and I think you'll enjoy having extra episodes. You don't have to wait a week.
That's right.
You've got these extra ones.
And we've got lots of episodes coming up for the extras, and we might even think about doing a couple a month.
Yeah, we're kind of ahead of the curve on what we were doing, so that could happen.
Yeah.
Now, also, if you enjoy True Crime Brewery, we would ask you to subscribe. If you're on iTunes, subscribing to our podcast would really help us out as far as our ranking on iTunes and getting more listeners. And also, please don't forget to leave a 5-star review if you haven't done that yet, because we'll thank you on an upcoming episode for that. And you can follow True Crime Brewery on Twitter at TieGrabberPods, also on Instagram, TieGrabber Podcasts, and on Facebook, tiegrabber.com/Facebook. Also, with summer coming, I just have to add it's a perfect time to shop the brewery at tiegrabber.com. Get yourself a nice, soft, figure-flattering TCB t-shirt or a party-friendly snifter.
Or a bottle opener that you can keep in your wallet or your pocket of your bathing suit.
That's really cool.
So, very useful.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's head on down to feedback, a little music, and then we'll talk about a couple emails we got.
Okay, let's go.
Welcome to feedback.
Here we go, folks.
I have a suggestion I want to read, and it is about the Mackenzie Cowell case. And this is an email I got from Nicole. So Nicole says, the murder of Mackenzie Cowell from Wenatchee, Washington has always been interesting, and I always felt that the trial of Chris Wilson was a bit of a witch hunt. There are a lot of questions that went unanswered. It would be awesome to have you guys take a look at it. So I did take a look at it a little bit. There was a 48 Hours or Dateline episode that I watched on it. It was really interesting. Now, Mackenzie Cowell, she was murdered 6 years ago, and the man who pled guilty to murdering her is Chris Wilson. So he's currently serving 14 years in prison, but he's maintained his innocence.
But he pled guilty.
Yes, he ended up taking a plea after 85% of the potential jurors polled said that they would have no trouble finding him guilty. Not sure how that worked.
Me either.
But he was pressured into taking the plea, he said. And evidence against him was some blood found in his apartment that matches Mackenzie's. So his contention is that the blood was planted by the police. And while this does seem far-fetched, it's possible because only a small patch of blood was found in his apartment when Mackenzie's death involved her jugular vein being cut. So logically, there should be more blood. But the evidence against him beyond that seems questionable as well. So there's a website about freeing Chris Wilson, and there's a lot of articles on it. There were some other suspects, some people who were working for the police as informants, had other stories about what happened to her, which were interesting. Her boyfriend actually failed a couple of questions on the lie detector test. Plus, it's the loss of a really sweet girl, so it might be worth doing a case on it.
That sounds interesting. I always like conspiracy theories.
Well,
so
I guess it's a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, planting evidence.
Yeah, but it could just be like one cop that did it. It doesn't have to be a conspiracy.
Well, it only takes one.
Okay, when I think conspiracy, I think of a group working together. I guess that's not necessarily it, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think that sounds like an interesting thing.
Yeah, so I put it on my list. We might do that.
Let's look into it.
Okay. All right, and then I know you've got something.
I have something from Ezra Lee on YouTube. It's regarding a monster in the neighborhood. He's talking about porn exposure in children.
So a monster in the neighborhood was the case of Jessica Ridgway, who was killed by a teenager in the neighborhood, Austin Sigg.
Austin Sigg.
Okay.
Who killed the child and dismembered her.
Yeah.
And he had been watching extreme porn from an early age.
Violent porn.
Right.
Right.
So Ezra says, I'm sorry, but the pornographic email sounds like straight bullshit to me. That's like saying violent video games causes people to murder. You would have kids gunning people down in the streets. You're already fucked up in the head if you allow porn to make you do violent and unsavory things. Plus, you're forgetting to take into account that more and more women are now starting to watch porn, and young girls. Also, there is a growing gay population in porn as well. I think this is just a feminist bias against porn because she claims that women are oppressed by porn. I've seen other feminists make that claim with not really anything else to back it up other than their opinions. Sorry, I'm calling it bullshit. Now, I'm not saying that kids should be watching porn. They most definitely should not. But I'm pretty sure porn isn't going to make them be sexist towards women.
Okay, so he's talking about an email that a listener sent in.
He is.
And she was a psychologist or something.
She's a psychologist, a learned person.
Yes.
So.
And she actually did have research. She
did.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm trying not to blow Ezra off totally, but I think there's more than enough studies that have been done, that have been published in the American Academy of Pediatrics and other journals, that demonstrate that violence desensitizes you to violent behavior, as does watching porn desensitizes you towards that. So you're more likely, maybe it's not a guarantee that you're going to go out and gun people down.
I think it's far from a guarantee. I mean, I think someone has to be predisposed to that kind of behavior. I think he's right about that.
They do.
Yes.
But watching violent video games or watching violent porn doesn't help.
Well, no.
And I think porn is going to make you have different attitudes towards women. Way different.
Well, the kind of porn we're talking about. I mean, when he's talking about, women are watching more porn, I think women are watching romantic porn.
Softcore porn?
Yeah. I mean, what women watch for porn usually is a relationship between two people, where they do show the sex, but it's not anything like what we're talking about with Austin Sigg, was actually children being murdered.
He was watching snuff films and all sorts of horrendous porn.
That's a whole other thing.
And that's a totally different thing. But I think there's enough studies that have been done that would refute Ezra's comments.
I think so. Remember the psychiatrist who testified in Austin Sigg's trial talked about how the stuff he was watching, you have to be predisposed. You already have an issue if you're enjoying it.
Yeah.
You wouldn't enjoy it.
No question.
Right.
Right.
But if he's a little impressionable child, and like you suggested, maybe the father had some disturbing stuff in the house on the computer or something and that's how he got exposed to it initially, because the father had issues.
True.
Father was violent.
Yeah. But that also goes along with what Ezra was suggesting, that there's a genetic element in there.
I think there is some.
So you're predisposed to begin with.
But being predisposed and then not being exposed to it, you might not end up hurting anyone.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
It's the combination of the things.
It is.
Okay. So.
Multifactorial.
That's right. Okay, so I have an email from Gretchen in Indiana. She says, Hi, Jill and Dick. As a nurse, I want to thank you for your Nurses Week podcast on Beverly Allett, the killer nurse, with your dedication to those of us who care about our patients. Well done. I want to take this opportunity to talk about the role of the nurse in relation to Munchausen syndrome by proxy. It is important in many ways. Close observations and documentation lead to the recognition of suspicious findings. In combination with knowledge of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, recognition of the signs and symptoms may lead to the diagnosis. And nurses may be the only persons to whom a mother makes statements that can be incriminating. The close professional relationship resulting from the care and being there creates a bond between nurse and mother that no other member of the multidisciplinary team tends to develop. A trust sometimes allows for the mother to say suspicious things to the nurse, and the nurse is the one who provides direct care for the child and is a fundamental member of the healthcare team as well. So in a situation of caring for a child victim of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, the nurse must be vigilant and only intervene based on professional judgment and fact, not the demands of the parent. The use of a multidisciplinary team helps to support the nurse, and having others aware of the situation is crucial. Nursing is a caring profession. Working with a case of suspected or diagnosed Munchausen syndrome by proxy is very trying for the staff. A diagnosis of Munchausen syndrome by proxy is child abuse. It's not a form of child abuse that is well known, nor is it easily detected. Overall, further research and study is needed in this area of mental health disorders. The nursing role related to the assessment, diagnosis, and treatment is important throughout the process. The most important thing is to be able to recognize and diagnose it. This is accomplished first with increased awareness, especially with nurses that care for children. There are many ethical dilemmas and legal difficulties when gathering evidence to determine a diagnosis. The demands on the nursing staff are multiple, and they need strong support systems. Nurses are the ones who are in the perfect position to advocate for a child who may be a victim. So it's critical that the physicians and the administrators support the nurses' concerns. Fortunately, nurses like Beverly are exceedingly rare, and nurses are protectors and caretakers of their patients.
Well, that's a well-written letter from Gretchen.
Yes.
And all I can say is I would wholeheartedly agree with her, because these kids that are being abused by a parent or parents that are in the hospital for whatever procedures or reasons, who better to observe the interaction between parent and child but the nurse?
Right.
Way more than the physician.
Yeah, because the physician's going to, see him once or twice a day?
Right. And then the nurse is there for 8 to 12 hours, and they're the best source of information. And I would also echo her comment at the end that the nurses should have the full support of the physician and hospital administration.
Well, and that's where I think the multidisciplinary teams are really important, because I think even the nurses' aides, everybody should be on board with what you're looking for.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, because sometimes in some facilities the nurse's aide is going to be in there more often than the nurse.
Right.
Doing changing the bed, stuff like that.
Right, and the child's not admitted with a diagnosis of Munchausen by proxy. They're admitted with a medical diagnosis.
Well, yeah, right.
And so it's up to the nurse or the nurse's aide or the physician or whoever's interacting with the family to be able to recognize what's going on.
Right, right. And I like how she said, that it should be based on fact. Don't get judgy, like, oh, that mother's crazy, and sometimes that's not good either.
We all have parents that have different viewpoints on raising children.
Right, and the nurses aren't always going to agree.
Right.
But that's very different than having a diagnosis of Munchausen syndrome by proxy.
It certainly is.
Right. Okay, well, that's all I have for feedback today. And I just wanted to let the listeners know that I'm really excited about our next episode. Our next episode, we're speaking with Rhonda Stapley, who's a survivor. She was abducted by Ted Bundy back in the 70s.
One of America's favorite serial killers.
Yeah, so it's going to be a really interesting episode. I'm excited about it.
It is. I mean, the interview with her and the book she's written are
amazing.
Just amazing things.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm looking forward to that too.
Yep, we both are.
Okay.
Okay.
Over
Thank
and
you for
out.
listening. Bye-bye.
See you next time.